The annual Singapore International Energy Week begins today under the theme A Connected and Sustainable Energy World.
Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is often called the transition fuel towards a net zero carbon emissions. And Asia is likely to drive global demand for LNG, being the top energy importing region.
CNA's Roland is live at the summit and joins us for more. Roland?
Arnold, there's no doubt that LNG will play a critical role in the energy mix for a long time to come, as renewable energy sources are nowhere near the scale to meet with global demand. Australia's oil and gas giant, Woodside Energy, has been at the forefront of that push for LNG development. It currently has some $20 billion plus portfolio of new projects in various stages of development. And joining me now is Woodside's CEO, that's Meg O'Neill, I should say, not Orion, O'Neill. And she joins us now to talk about all things LNG. Meg, sorry about the name.
That's all right.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Roland.
So Woodside really is committed to climate action. You've had a plan to cut emissions by 2050, and it's a hard target, not a goal. $5 billion being spent on alternative energy like hydrogen. Tell us more.
Sure. So we have two pillars in our climate transition plan. First is to reduce our direct emissions. So that's our scope 1 and 2 emissions. We have a goal to reduce those emissions by 30% by 2030, measured off a baseline, which is 2016 to 2020. Now, that's not going to be easy. We've got a lot of mature assets that we're having to try to decarbonize, but I'm really pleased with how the team is tackling that challenge. The second pillar to our climate transition action plan is to invest in the products and services that the world will need to help decarbonize. So this is our new energy strategy. It's to invest in projects like ammonia, hydrogen, carbon capture and sequestration to help our customers with their decarbonization goals. And our goal for those programs is to invest $5 billion, which will deliver the equivalent of about 5 million tons per annum of CO2 avoided.
Okay. But it does seem, though, that your shareholders weren't convinced really with the management commitment to climate change but when it was put to the vote earlier this year.
Yeah, so we get mixed signals from our shareholders. We have some shareholders who are very focused on us being responsible oil and gas developer and operator. There are other investors who want to see us take more action on climate change. We talk with many of our investors all around the world, and we're trying to navigate a path that will allow Woodside to thrive through the energy transition and to be a viable, strong company well into the 2030s and 2040s. So we think we're on the right track, but we'll continue to talk to our shareholders.
Okay. There are signs that global economy may be cooling off. Energy demand then would likely follow suit, particularly if Chinese growth disappoints. What's your outlook for the energy sector?
Yeah, there's factors both ways, right? So obviously a lot of focus on China and what's happening to China's economic development. But the other factor that's really interesting in the energy space is data centers and the role of AI. And as the world starts to understand the potential that AI offers, there's a real strong push from many in the tech sector to deploy AI and build out new data centers at increasing scale, which has an immediate impact on energy demand. So we watch a broad range of factors, actually. China's important, but so are these other factors such as data centers.
Okay, so data centers, big tech is deploying these small modular nuclear reactors as an alternative. Do you have another viable option?
So we're not in the nuclear game, but that's one pathway that some players have chosen. I think if you look at the totality of solutions that data centers have chosen, it's a range of solutions. And look, it's probably worth highlighting that we announced earlier this morning that we've signed a term sheet with Keppel to supply them with liquid hydrogen as early as 2030. And that really is to underpin the Singaporean data center story, where the Singaporean government has been very clear about new data centers must bring low carbon power. So we're super excited about the agreement we signed with Keppel, and I think that's a great example of a different approach to the SMR approach.
So hydrogen, that's like the new fuel of the future. But in terms of, we talked about this, scalability. in terms of meeting the needs of the world. How far away are we? Are we talking 10, 20, 30 years?
Oh, it's going to take time. And if we think about today's energy system, so the world today uses about 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And that didn't happen overnight. That took about 100 plus years to get to that level of use. It's going to take significant investment and time to build out things like ammonia and hydrogen to that same scale.
Right, okay. So gas is still the fastest growing primary energy market. That's behind coal. Seaborne traded gas, that's also growing even faster because China's been building several import terminals. Where do you see prices and demand?
Let me start with the demand, because that sets the story for prices. So one of the things that we've seen is tremendous growth in LNG demand, so liquefied natural gas. That's grown more than 50% over the last decade. When we look out to the future, when we look at things like the decarbonization commitments of nations like China, India, when we look at the energy demand growth and economic growth in countries like Southeast Asia, we anticipate LNG demand is going to grow by another 50% in the coming decade. So huge potential for LNG to be an important part of the world's energy mix. And in the space of climate change, it's worth noting that today's global LNG trade is equal to only 12% of global coal use. So again, as the world starts to think about how to decarbonize, one of the easiest opportunities is to displace coal with LNG in the power sector. So we see huge opportunities in LNG.
Prices, outlook?
Prices. Look, prices are always going to be a factor of balance between supply and demand. Gas demand tends to be quite seasonal. So when it's cold in Japan and Korea, for example, that causes more demand, causes price increases. So, look, we've got our views as to long-term steady state prices. And at the end of the day, we make our investment decisions based on long-term pricing, not anything in the short term.
Woodside has been tremendously successful in managing LNG projects for the past 25 years, but developmental cost has become more expensive. I mean, the Scarborough project, for example, off the coast of Western Australia, that's been slowly creeping up.
Well, I'd be cautious about that. So earlier this year, we announced a 4% cost increase, and in a period of high inflationary cost pressures, I actually think the team's done a fantastic job to contain the cost pressures to be just 4%. We're well on track to first LNG in 2026. Recently completed the pipeline installation, so that's one of our major scopes. So the project is going really well, and really proud of how the team is managing those inflationary cost pressures.
And Woodside has been on a very aggressive acquisition path. You've acquired Tellurian, that's a U.S. gas developer in Texas, for $1.2 billion. Are the pieces coming together to be a global LNG powerhouse for Woodside?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been very clear to us for a while is we've got an incredibly strong LNG position here in the Pacific. But as we think about how the LNG market is developing, we believe it's important to have a complementary position in the Atlantic. And we've been looking at opportunities in the U.S. for a while, and when we saw Tellurian and started having discussions, it was very clear that this is an opportunity for us to replicate what we've done in Australia and North America. So closed the deal just a couple weeks ago and working towards being ready for a final investment decision in the first quarter of next year.
Okay, Meg, it was very good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on our show. And that was Meg O'Neill, CEO of Woodside Energy. In the next